Yes, I have.
Okay. We will now formally begin the meeting. This meeting is being audio recorded, and that recording will be the record of this meeting. Welcome. I'm John Stevens, a teacher at the UNC Chapel Hill School of Government. I am the facilitator for this public input session of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality for the development of digester systems general permits. Let me just give you a little bit of background about how we got here, the purpose and ground rules, and then move to the speakers. I will list all speakers and say how we'll be handling that. And the key thing for people participating, we'll be using as appropriate *3 or *3 on your phone when I call your name to be a speaker. Then on our end, you will be unmuted and able to then have your say. The North Carolina General Assembly has directed DEQ to develop a general permit for digester systems on existing permitted animal feeding operations by July of 2022. To conduct an open and transparent process in the development of this general permit, DEQ contracted with the UNC School of Government to develop a facilitated stakeholder process. Over the past month, 2 stakeholder work group sessions were held with participants from environmental and community groups, agencies and academia, and industry to share ideas, information, and perspectives on potential permit conditions for digester systems. The stakeholder work group discussed a variety of issues related to performance standards, operations and maintenance, monitoring, inspections, and concerns about environmental and community impacts as they relate to the digester systems. Those discussions were conducted with the understanding that the conditions of the current general permit for animal feeding operations are not open for debate at this time, only the additional conditions that would apply specifically to digester systems that collect and process biogas. This meeting is your opportunity to provide your perspective and input before the Division of Water Resources develops the draft general permit for digester systems. My role is to ensure everyone has an opportunity to share their input and be heard. So the purpose of today's public input session is to hear from any interested member of the North Carolina general public on their views and information related to the Division of Water Resources developing a general permit for digester systems. I offer 3 ground rules for tonight's public input session. Focus on the meeting purpose, which means individual speakers providing views, informations, and recommendations for DWR in developing general permits for digester systems for swine, cattle, and wet poultry operations, 3 separate areas of permitting. Ground rule 2, express differences respectfully. And ground rule 3, honor speaker limits. So coming to speakers, in a moment, I will go through the full list of speakers and we'll repeat it periodically so people know when it's their turn. Speakers for this meeting were asked to pre-register, and the registration period ended at 5 p.m. yesterday. With 28 people signed up to speak tonight, we will limit each person to 3 minutes to allow everyone a chance to provide input. I will alert speakers when they have 30 seconds left and when they have reached the 3-minute limit. The meeting will close no later than 9 p.m. I will verbally list 3 people at a time throughout the meeting: the speaker, the person next up, and the person after that. As a reminder, this meeting is being video recorded, and that video will be the record of this meeting. We may have participants on the phone who did not register in advance. Once we have completed the 28 pre-registered speakers, if time allows, we will allow other people to have a 3-minute speaking period. I may stop periodically to summarize what I'm hearing, but I will want to make sure we move through this swiftly because the main focus is hearing from each speaker in an even-handed manner. If there are questions put to DWR staff or to other speakers, that is allowed, but this session will not provide time for questions and answers. DWR staff is observing this meeting, and the record of this meeting is part of their input process for permit development. Written comments are being accepted and will continue to be accepted through the close of business this Friday, December 17th. The information is also on the website, but let me state the email address for those public comments. It is altogether these words with no spacing, public comments DWR. At least in what's shown to me, DWR is capitalized. I'm not sure if that's critical, but public comments DWR at ncdenr.gov. I am sorry we have encountered difficulties with this WebEx platform. As we have noted earlier, when your name is called on your phone, press *3, which will show us that your hand is raised, and we will unmute you and you may proceed for your comments. When you are finished, please remember to press *3 again, and that will take your hand down. Let me now read the full list of registered speakers. Again, we have 28 people, and I will return to the top and call on the first person in a moment, but here are the 28 in order of registration. Sherry Vick, Stephen Norris, Keith Larrick, Jasmine Washington, Jillian Howell, Kay Riebold, Hua Huang, Amanda Staudermann, Blakely Hilbrand, Anne Cohn, Robert Moore, Larry Baldwin, David Norden, Hemp Burdett, Roy Lee Lindsay, Chad Herring, Eve Honeycutt, Marlo Ivy, Kathy Buckley, Rebecca Drohan, Gus Simmons, Ridge Graham, Kevin Weston, Angie Mayer, Edgar Miller, Steve Kavanaugh, Elwood Garner, and Mark Maloney. Those are the 28 that have pre-registered. So we're about ready to begin. A reminder that when your name is called, it is *3, which allows us to see that you are ready to speak. We can unmute you and then you can proceed. The first three, again, I'll name all three and then return to the first. Sherry Vick, Stephen Norris, Keith Larrick. Sherry Vick, please use *3 so you can be unmuted. I see your hand is up there at user number 29, and I hope Josh will unmute you and then you can proceed. Just waiting a moment for it showing that you are unmuted. So just checking again, I do not see the unmute yet, Josh.
I am sending request unmute. The user has to accept on their end. Hopefully they're getting that prompt.
Okay, Sherry, so if you accept the unmute and that shows a change on my screen, then I know you will be ready to proceed, and I'll start the 3-minute clock, but not until I hear from you. So I see the hand up, waiting for you to accept so you can unmute and begin. Again, apologies for this WebEx glitch compared to the design that would have allowed for video participation. Okay. Waiting Sherry Vick.
Josh, can we review how a caller can accept the unmute?
It is my understanding that you will get a prompt on your screen to unmute yourself when I press the request unmute button. Not sure if that is the case here. I'm sending a request. Sorry for any technical difficulties.
Okay, we have a caller from 910290 that looks ready to go. Oops, nope, that just changed. Just trying to navigate the technology that Josh Kostrinsky. Okay, let me pause a moment. I see what appears to be a microphone ready to go. Sherry Vick, are you using the 910290 number? It is showing on my screen that you should have access to speak, but I'm not hearing anything.
Hello, can you hear me?
I believe if that's yes, at least right now it shows call-in number 910290. We're actually trying to reach Sherry Vick as our first speaker today.
Yeah, but it keeps telling me to unmute myself, but I'm at the bottom of the queue that you read out a while ago.
Okay, I'm sorry. I may recognize that voice. Is that Elwood Garner?
It is.
Okay, Elwood, you are right. You're second to last, I'm afraid. So I'm afraid
27 or 28, but it keeps telling me to unmute myself. So I just wanted to unmute me to make sure I won't miss my place in line.
Okay. We know your phone works, yeah, and unmuting works, and I thank you. And I appreciate your understanding about the order that had been set up. So
I'm gonna mute myself back.
Okay, and if you could also, Elwood, use *3, that would lower your hand. So then we know to look for a different number for the raise hand for Sherry Vick. That's a good question, Christine. Is *3 to raise a hand or to unmute? Can you please guide us, Josh?
For those with smartphones, you should receive a prompt on the WebEx app, or you should receive a prompt to unmute, but otherwise I believe that *6 mutes and unmutes yourself, *3 raises your hand. And I've got another hand up here. I'm going to attempt to unmute.
Okay, we have a user.
Hello, this is Cherie. Hello.
Cherie, okay, thank you very much.
Trying to get through. The WebEx wasn't working for me. Okay, let's just start, okay? I finally figured out how to speak.
The floor is yours, Cherie.
Hello, my name is Cherie Vick, as if you couldn't guess. I'm a member of the Conservation Committee for the Capital Chapter of the Sierra Club, and I'm also a member of St. Michael's Episcopal Church here in Raleigh. I'm concerned both about our environment and about social justice, which is one of our ministries in the Episcopal Church. I became aware of the Grady Road Swine Waste to Biogas Project by attending 2 seminars presented by the North Carolina Council of Churches and the NC Interfaith Power and Light. They described a proposed venture between Smithfield Foods, which I believe was a Chinese company, and Dominion Energy to create biogas, largely the extremely dangerous methane, by capping hog waste lagoons with covers to make a digester to create the gas. Then they plan to build pipelines to transport this gas to another facility to process it and add it to the natural gas pipeline. I see several problems with this project. I'm going to mention 4 of them. Smithfield oil line is already creating lagoons and spraying hog waste on fields, harming rivers and streams in the area. Our neighbors in Duplin and Sampson counties, many of which are minorities and Native Americans, cannot even open their windows in the warmer weather without having the stench of hog waste pervade their homes. This is not only unpleasant for the residents, but we know that people living near industrial hog operations have higher death rates from causes such as anemia, kidney disease, and tuberculosis. Finally, what's going to happen to that methane gas in the pipelines when we have the next hurricane in eastern North Carolina? Or worse yet, what about a tornado? Who's going to clean up that mess? I respectfully ask that DEQ not grant these water permits. Instead, that you ask Smithfield Farms to take another look at how to manage hog waste from these CAFOs that doesn't pose an environmental and quality of life risk to those living in eastern North Carolina. Thank you.
And thank you, Sherry. And as a reminder, Sherry, I'm sorry, I want to get your name right.
Yes.
And as a reminder to everyone, I am keeping track of time up to 3 minutes, and I will give a 30-second notice before that 3-minute limit. The second speaker will be Stephen Norris, followed by Keith Larrick, followed by Jasmine Washington. Stephen Norris, if you could use *3, and Cherie, if you could also use *3, which lowers your hand now that you are done, please. Thank you, Cherie. Thanks everyone for their patience as we're navigating our choices on WebEx. Stephen Norris should receive an invite and then a *3 to get access to unmute and then be ready to speak. And just checking the list for when I see a raised hand or when a caller is unmuted and ready to speak. I'm not going to rush because I know we've had our ups and downs. Aha, okay, thank you, Josh, for the reminder that it's *3 unmute, then *3 to raise the hand. You get the unmute and then *6 to unmute. Is that correct? I'm trying to get this right. So Stephen Norris, it should be, we'll give it a moment. Again, we will, if anyone's having significant difficulties, we may move to the next speaker, but you do not lose your chance to speak. We want to try to honor the list, but also understand technical difficulties may slow things down just a bit. I want to give it just one more moment for Stephen Norris, followed by Keith Larrick, followed by Jasmine Washington. Again, Stephen Norris is our second speaker on the list. *3 raises the hand. You get the request to unmute, and then *6 on your calling end to unmute and be ready to speak. I hope I have that right, Josh. Thank you, Christine, for giving me a thumbs up. Mr. Norris, it seems there may be difficulties at this moment. We're going to go to the next, but we can come back to you when we have solved the access issue. So, Mr. Norris, you will get a chance to speak, but for now, we'll go to Keith Larrick, then Jasmine Washington, then Jillian Howell. Mr. Larrick, if it could be *3, which shows a raise of a hand. Thank you. I see that at 919-749. And then you should get the request to, or the ability to unmute, and *6 to unmute. Go ahead, Mr. Larrick.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. My name is Keith Larrick, and I'm with North Carolina Farm Bureau. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. Biogas projects at animal operations have the potential to reduce methane emissions and improve odors and air quality associated with the farms. These are two goals that everyone should be in favor of. These are not just ag industry talking points, but well-supported facts from NC State University, EPA, and DEQ itself. The 4 permits issued for the Align RNG project earlier this year have additional monitoring requirements to specifically address issues related to new anaerobic digesters. The 4 permits require quarterly monitoring of digester influent and effluent in addition to monitoring as the waste is applied. I would note that it will be hard to gain relevant information on digester influent due to the periodic nature of barn flushing and the different sizes and numbers of pigs throughout the year. So it would be more appropriate to monitor digester effluent and then the effluent as it is land applied from secondary storage. In the stakeholder meetings, there were many concerns about whether or not the existing land application fields will be able to assimilate the land applied wastewater. In addition to the protections that already exist in the general permit, the 4 permits for the Align project had additional monitoring that we talked about before. Routine monitoring of the land applied waste in any case, which is already required, will provide needed verification of nitrogen levels. As DEQ has noted, there are now 15 swine farms that have digester systems in the state. Many of these have operated for a decade or more with none of the gloom and doom scenarios that some have predicted. In situations where there is no secondary storage, these systems do result in higher ammonia concentrations in wastewater, but that is then addressed by the waste plan throughout the regular permitting process. In the situations where there is secondary storage using the existing lagoon, there is almost no change to the wastewater or ammonia emission rate. The point is that DEQ is well aware of how these systems work, and they're well equipped to regulate them through a common sense general permit. The Farm Act this year requires creation of these general permits, but it does have guardrails. In addition to the requirements of the existing general permits, DEQ may add conditions required to authorize construction, monitoring, and proper operation of the digester system. Many of the conditions suggested in the stakeholder groups fall well outside of DEQ's authority under the session law. In the hearing officer's report for the 4 digester permits issued earlier this year, DEQ very clearly outlined their authority related to biogas projects and directly addressed many of the environmental issues that have been brought up. Nothing has changed since then, and I urge DEQ to keep that report in mind when developing the draft of these general permits. Thank you.
And thank you at exactly 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Larrick. Again, we have 49 attendees. Let me note that Mr. Larrick was the second speaker. We had difficulty reaching Stephen Norris. We will return to him whenever we can get access. The next speakers now are Jasmine Washington, Jillian Howell, Kay Riebold, with the 3-minute time limit. Jasmine Washington, for raising your hand using *3 on your phone, please.
Hello?
Yes, Ms. Washington, if you're ready, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you.
And good evening. My name is Jasmine Washington, and I'm an attorney at Southern Environmental Law Center. And I'm here tonight to ask DEQ to make 4 recommendations in drafting the digester system general permit. First, to adopt cleaner technologies and practices that are compatible with biogas production and that address the water and air pollution generated by biodigesters and the lagoon spray system. Second, to require robust monitoring and reporting on groundwater, surface water, and waste coming in and out of the systems. Third, to require regular updating of nutrient management plans to account for changes in land applied digester waste. And lastly, to meaningfully engage the communities surrounding and most directly impacted by these hog operations. DEQ has a statutory mandate to require the waste treatment and disposal alternative with the least adverse impact on the environment. DEQ also has a regulatory requirement to consider the impact of its permitting decisions on communities of color under Title VI. The current lagoon spray field system pollutes and endangers the health of nearby residents as well as aquatic wildlife. The model currently permitted of adding biodigesters to these systems does little to nothing to address these concerns and will lead to increased ammonia emissions, nitrates, and other pollutants, which will directly impact air and water quality. There are cleaner technologies available and currently deployed in the United States that are compatible with biogas production. Monitoring and reporting would assure that hog operations are in compliance with their permits and increase transparency for the public. The updating of nutrient management plans would prevent the all too common over-application of waste onto fields. And further, DEQ, as a recipient of federal funding, must act in compliance with Title VI. Therefore, DEQ cannot administer its programs as permits in a manner that has the effect of discriminating against communities of color. DEQ should conduct a robust environmental justice analysis, act based on the findings of that analysis, and meaningfully engage the communities of color that surround these permitted operations. DEQ cannot stand by and allow industry to greenwash their polluting systems while continuing to endanger the health of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and working class residents surrounding these operations. In the digester system general permit, DEQ must require more: cleaner technologies, monitoring and reporting, updating of nutrient application plans, and meaningful engagement with those most affected by these permitting decisions. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Have a good night.
Thank you, Ms. Washington. The next 3 speakers are Jillian Howell, Kay Riebold, and Hua Huang. Jillian Howell, you're next, please, for *3. And then once you get okay to unmute, *6. Okay, and Ms. Washington, if you could use *3 to lower your hand, and I think we're ready for.
Can you hear me?
Ms. Howell, yes.
Yep, you can hear me?
Yes, certainly. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jill Howell. I'm the Pamlico Tar River Keeper with Sound Rivers. We're an environmental nonprofit that works to protect and monitor the waters of the Tar, Pamlico, and Neuse River basins. I want to first start by thanking DEQ for having you, John, as the independent facilitator for this meeting, as well as the technical stakeholder meetings. I think that's really important for these processes. But I also want to express my frustration at the WebEx issues we're having tonight. I know everybody's working on it, but this is, frankly unacceptable and doesn't help with actually giving people the opportunity to provide their input. Process is almost as important as outcome, and this is all just pretty disappointing for such an important issue. Specific to the permit itself, this is related to the permit for swine operations. My understanding is that the existing swine general permit is going to be used as a basis for the development of the digester permit. And during stakeholder meetings, it was pretty clear from industry representatives that they believe the conditions of the existing general permit are sufficient to be protective of the environment, with the addition of the anaerobic digesters that don't really change much about the operation. So therefore, not much needs to be added to the existing permit. But I want to counter that sort of narrative. I would say that the existing general permit is insufficient to be protective of the environment and our water quality. We see discharges of hog waste, whether it be from poorly maintained lagoons or runoff from spray fields, happen time and time again and impact our waterways. We see spray violations all the time from the air, with waste being sprayed down before large storms, ponding on fields. And last year, about a year ago exactly, in the Neuse River Basin, we saw 1 million gallons of hog waste discharged from a facility. There had been no significant rain in the preceding days, and the facility had been cited by DEQ twice that year for freeboard violations. This is all to highlight that the existing general permit is not sufficient to properly regulate facilities as they are, and should be used as a floor, not a ceiling, for the development of this permit. DEQ should be including a robust surface water quality sampling program, groundwater sampling program, and sampling of influent and effluent to not only better understand what is happening, because there is going to be so much variation in technologies implemented on facilities, but also to really verify all these claims that these operations aren't going to change anything and that they are good for the environment and without having any negative impacts. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Howell. The next three speakers are Kay Riebold, Hua Huang, and Amanda Staudermann. Again, my apologies for any mispronunciation. Kay Riebold is next. And Ms. Howell, if you could use *3 to lower your hand, please. Thank you. And as a notice to people who may have joined, we are up to our sixth speaker on the list. We're trying to work with Stephen Norris, who is number 2, who we could not reach. But right now it's Kay Riebold. Ms. Riebold? Just checking my list to see if it's changed online for *3 to ask for unmute. Mr. Kostrinsky gives the go ahead. I see indeed call-in number 919621, and then *6 for people on the phone to unmute and be ready to speak. Ms. Riebold?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. When you're ready, Ms. Riebold.
Okay. My name is Kay Riebold, and I live in Raleigh. I'm a volunteer with Apple, the Alliance to Protect Our People and Places We Live. I appreciate the opportunity to offer my statement today. I oppose any further biogas permits being considered by North Carolina DEQ and call for an end to the lagoon and spray field system of swine waste management. Communities of color and low-income communities living near large hog farms have suffered terribly from air and water pollution. The current system of swine biogas facilities disproportionately harms communities of color. The cumulative impacts from harm by these operations must be taken into consideration by DEQ. The lagoon and spray field system pollutes the air, creeks, rivers, and groundwater. The pollutants harm the health of communities living near these industrialized hog and chicken operations. Biogas projects increase the threat of water pollution. Covering a waste lagoon increases the amount of ammonia in the liquid waste that is sprayed on cropland and can run off in surface waters or seeps into groundwater. No permits for biogas facilities should even be considered by DEQ unless there is new technology implemented in the biogas process that reduces harmful pollutants in the air and water. DEQ should be aware that there will be continuing lawsuits by the EPA and environmental groups unless it takes action to protect North Carolina residents from the extremely harmful impacts of industrialized farming, including poultry farms and biogas. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Riebold, and thank you all speakers for honoring the 3-minute limit. The next 3 speakers are Hua Huang, Amanda Staudermann, and Blakely Hilbrand. Hua Huang, you are next, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Sorry, give me a minute. All right. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Hua Huang. I am the group chair for the capital group of the North Carolina Sierra Club. And before I start, I just want to also make a comment real quick that having heard some of the previous speakers, such as Ms. Howell, about the discrepancy between what DEQ said they would be doing and versus what has actually been observed, is a clear sign that there's a need for DEQ to actually ensuring environmental integrity and the integrity of the community that's being impacted with the things that they're doing. So moving forward, I am also concerned about the environmental impact of biogas and the health and safety of people who live near confined animal feeding operations who are harmed by outdated lagoon and spray field waste systems that these factory farms use. I'm worried about the growth of the biogas in communities that are already suffering pollution from industrial agriculture. And biogas is being greenwashed by industrial agriculture industry to disguise for what it really is, the perpetuation of an outdated, inefficient, and irresponsible method of waste management. The truth is that biogas from industrial hog operations is not clean, it's not climate friendly, and shouldn't be part of the North Carolina energy future. And studies show that people of color disproportionately bear the burden of pollution from industrial hog operation, and people live near those operations have higher death rates from causes like anemia, kidney disease, and tuberculosis. We should protect communities from ongoing threat of ground and surface water contamination that these lagoons host, into thinking that adding biogas will solve the problem. So I respectfully ask the board to advise DEQ to take the following actions in the development of hog waste to energy general permit. 1, include strong water quality monitoring, and DEQ should include monitoring provisions in the permit to evaluate the impacts of biogas operations on the environment and public health. 2, ensure the permitting process is transparent, that the public has full information, and that the public has ample opportunity to provide input in the permitting process, which on that note, if DEQ can provide another opportunity for those who couldn't make it tonight to speak, even though they signed up, that would be very much appreciated. 3, prevent the agency's permitting decision from having a discriminatory impact on communities of color and low income. And 4, consider the cumulative impact of our pollution to resources in this area when drafting permits for the project. This includes the impact of the state's large and growing poultry industry, as poultry CAFOs are often constructed in the same communities where biogas are planned. These are the recommendations that I would like to make. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wang. Just so you know, on my end, while I could understand almost all of that, there was a little bit of technical choppiness, but again, everything is being recorded, so DWR can go back and listen carefully for any small segments that may have been hard to listen to. Our next 3 speakers, Amanda Staudermann, Blakely Hilbrand, Ann Cohn. Amanda Staudermann, you're next for 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
My name is Amanda Staudermann. I'm with Clean Water for North Carolina. This biogas general permit is clearly moving forward despite longstanding concerns about the hog lagoon and spray field system. While there may not be more animals added under the new general permit, many swine operators are requesting to add additional waste pits as they apply for anaerobic digesters. This means in some cases twice the amount of waste will be stored on site than before, and therefore risk of breach and flooding due to weather events is multiplied. Several hog operators who have already applied for biogas permits had received notice of violations from DEQ for keeping their lagoons too full. Yet there's nothing yet in place to prevent such violators from building additional lagoons on site. The digestate from biogas system will contain more dissolved phosphorus and more ammonia emissions. The mineralized nature of these compounds means they're more easily able to move through the soil, which contributes to leaking of nutrients into watersheds, especially in areas such as in the eastern region with more loose or sandy soils. There seems to be some dispute about the impacts of this new system, so in order to protect community members and their environments, we need DEQ to increase monitoring efforts for air, surface water, and groundwater impacts. Field application of digestate should be done in a precautionary manner to prevent any harm to the environment, especially sources of well water or drinking water. Groundwater monitoring should take place on a monthly basis rather than quarterly, and community members should be notified when neighboring well water impacts are detected. Monitoring should also include testing for the soil for nitrogen and phosphorus levels before any spreading occurs, and the digestate should be further treated, separating solids from liquids using a denitrification system, and any additional filtering, composting, or treatment as needed for best practices and responsible field application. DEQ should also consider requiring a synthetic liner for the secondary storage lagoons due to the soluble nature of the digestate. Don't let this biogas general permit move forward any further without doing what's in your power to protect communities. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Staudermann. With Ms. Staudermann, we've had 7 speakers. Number 2, Stephen Norris, we had technical difficulties, and he can return at any point since he was number 2 on the list. But moving forward, we have Blakely Hilbrand, Ann Cohn, and Robert Moore. Blakely Hilbrand, please raise your hand, *3, and then you'll be the next speaker for 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, Blakely Hilbrand, good to hear you, and 3 minutes for your talk time.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Blakely Hilbrand. I'm an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide comments tonight. I have comments regarding both the process that DEQ will use to develop this general permit, as well as the substance of the permit. And many of the comments that I was going to make tonight have already been covered, so I will try to be brief. With regard to the process here, I think it's really critical that DEQ use a transparent, accessible process to develop this permit. The technical issues that we've encountered tonight really reinforce the importance of providing multiple opportunities for community members and the public to offer feedback on any draft permit that DEQ issues in the new year. And consistent with what the DEQ Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board recommended, DEQ will hold multiple meetings, conduct at least 4 public meetings on this, including face-to-face meetings with the appropriate protocols in place, as well as, plenty of opportunity for written comments. I believe the EJEAB recommended at least 60 days for meetings and for public meetings and 90 days for written comments. And I would just reinforce those recommendations and remind DEQ that those recommendations were made by the DEQ Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board. With regard to the permit itself, we ask that DEQ conduct a robust environmental justice analysis that complies with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and not only conduct the analysis, but do more, and not just make that analysis a paper exercise, but follow through on the analysis and adjust the provisions of the permit so that the permit adequately protects communities living nearby. As others have already discussed, producing biogas from hog waste using digesters and open secondary lagoons and spray fields does not address many of the longstanding serious pollution problems of using open lagoons and spray fields to store and dispose of hog waste. This is consistent with what others have recommended. We recommend adopting cleaner technologies and practices that are compatible with biogas production and address the longstanding water and air pollution problems and human health concerns that are associated with lagoons and spray fields, robust monitoring and reporting requirements. I'll wrap up here in a moment, and a requirement to update nutrient management plans and to evaluate and address the impact of these permits on water quality. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide comments.
Thank you. Thank you for all speakers for honoring the 3-minute limit. We are about 1/3 of the way through the 28 registered speakers. The next 3 speakers are Ann Cohn, Robert Moore, Larry Baldwin. Ann Cohn, you're next, please. And Blakely Hildebrand, if you could use *3 to lower your hand, please. And yes, Ms. Cohn, yes, I think we hear you. You're all set.
Actually, I'm not sure that I signed up to speak. I'm actually home with a lot of congestion, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to understand me. I would like to associate myself with the comments made earlier by Keith Larrick, and I also would like to make the statement that it's very important that the Department of Environmental Quality also consider that these permits are also going to be affecting dairy farms that have very different operational issues, that do not have to comply with the siting requirements, and have a lot of challenges related to where they're located and other issues, but we don't want them to not have the opportunity to participate in digester technology. For example, there are digesters that have been used in the dairy industry that are small package digesters that are used in places like in the milking barns that are not open waste storage structures. So these permits have to be able to accommodate different types of digesters and accommodate the different types of operations. Everybody's talking about the swine permit, but there are 2 other permits that have to be considered, and these farmers must also have the opportunity to participate with this technology. And again, I associate my comments also with those made earlier by Keith Larrick. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohn. I'm sorry you're congested. I hope you feel better soon. Our next 3 speakers are Robert Moore, Larry Baldwin, David Norden. Mr. Moore, you may use *3, and then once you get the notice, *6 to unmute, and we'll hear your presentation.
Good evening. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Robert Moore. And first of all, I'm not going to make it to 3 minutes, and I'm probably not going to make it to the 2.5-minute mark. But I do want to comment on some things I've heard thus far. First of all and foremost, we are in Duplin County, not Dublin, not Duplin, or any of the above. Phonetically spelled Dooplin, Duplin County. Secondly, I would like to comment on something Mr. Keith Larrick said as well, that nothing has changed. We've heard a lot of talk about the environment, but what about the people? It's been well documented that Native Americans, African Americans, and Latinx Americans are more likely to live within 3 miles of industrial hog operations than white counterparts. We also know that in eastern North Carolina, hurricanes, which result from flooding, are much more frequent occurrences than in the past. My concern is that these new biogas projects will make the pollutions of our rivers, streams, and the air we breathe across eastern North Carolina even worse. I'm asking that the DEQ consider cumulative impacts of all the pollution sources in this area when drafting permits for this project. We're appealing to the DEQ to include monitoring provisions in the permit to evaluate the impacts of biogas operations on the environment and on the public. We're requesting that the DEQ ensure that the permitting process is transparent and that the public has complete information and that the public has ample opportunity to provide input in the permitting process for this project. Furthermore, we want assurances that the pipelines transporting biogas will not leak harmful greenhouse gas emissions into the air and into our communities. We want assurances that biogas does not increase water pollution and the noxious odors created from industrial hog operations. We're asking that the installation and utilization of cleaner technology to deal with hog waste and for an investment in research on cleaner and healthier technology to ensure the safety of those living near these operations. Finally, we're asking the DEQ to protect our communities by reviewing the permitting process to protect low-income families and individuals that cannot afford to protect themselves. These protections should require the immediate implementation of developed technology proven to reduce the impacts of environment already in use in other areas in the country and include long-term research on the cumulative impacts of all pollution sources in this area when drafting permits for this project. And last but not least, we want to thank you all for allowing me this opportunity to speak. And my name is Robert O. Moore. I'm president of NAACP of Duplin County.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Right at 3 minutes. I appreciate that. The next 3 speakers, Larry Baldwin, David Norden, Hemp Burdett. Mr. Larry Baldwin, next, please, sir. And for previous speakers, if you could please use *3 on your phone to lower your hand as we move forward to the next speakers.
This is Larry Baldwin. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, Mr. Baldwin, you have the floor.
Yes, Larry Baldwin. I'm with Waterkeeper Alliance here in North Carolina, supporting a number of riverkeepers who are also fighting this particular permit option. A lot of what I would talk about has already been said, so in the interest of time, I'll make it short. Capping lagoons, transporting methane through pipes under the ruse of producing renewable energy is just a huge farce. It's not renewable energy because it only takes care of a small portion of what is coming off of these facilities. Excuse me. Sure, you're removing some of the pollutants from the hog facilities in the form of methane, but it is what is being left behind, which is the problem. The lagoon spray field system, which is an archaic and out-of-date system of waste disposal, still remains, and the impacts from the lagoon and the spray field system still remains in regard to the environment and to communities. The biogas process is nothing more than a perpetuation of the system of waste disposal that continues to ruin our waters and pollute our communities. DEQ seems to also continually be avoiding the topic of cumulative impacts. Cumulative impacts must be considered in drafting these permits. Any permit that's being applied for must also include the addition of ESTs as part of the process. And these permits cannot violate Title VI provisions. So I'm asking DEQ to do the right thing and change the permit language to protect the communities and to protect the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. For our next three speakers, David Norden, Kemp Burdett, Roy Lee Lindsay. Mr. David Norden is next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, Mr. Norden.
Good evening. My name is David Nordine. I've employed by Smithfield Hog Production. I've lived in this area for over 25 years now. I've been involved in the environmental side with Smithfield for over 20 years. And what I think we have here is a basis with a general permit that's solid. It addresses a lot of the issues that were brought up in the stakeholder meeting. They, you know, whether it was sludge or the NUPs, a lot of it is from an operational side, it's self-regulating. And I don't understand why we would want to be testing the influent. It is important to the operator of the biogas system, but it's not going to answer anything because of a lot of variations that of the life cycle of the animals that are supplying the effluent. And I don't think that the digestate going to the secondary, our permit already covers the sampling of that. So I'm not sure what the concern is about the digestate, because ultimately the analysis that's put into that lagoon, secondary lagoon, is what's going to drive the land application and the limitations. So to a large degree, it is very, our NUPs, our permits, they have built-in controls already in there that we have to follow. The other thing is, this is my understanding, this is not going to be an air quality permit, so I'm not sure where the DWR has a stake in the air quality side of it, and some of it is regulated by state law as far as farms are exempt from emission requirements. And I guess the last thing is, you know, I'm on these farms every day. I don't know how many of the previous speakers are. I just think that we try to really, I know a lot of people that really try to do a good job and be sustainable for the environment. So thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Nordine. I'm sorry for my mispronunciation. The next three speakers, Kemp Burdett, Roy Lee Lindsay, Chad Herring. Kemp Burdett is next. Just as a reminder to all speakers, it's *3 on your phone when I call your name to raise the hand. Then Mr. Kostrinsky gives you the go-ahead, and then *6 to unmute and have your say at this public input session. I'm just giving a moment because I know it takes a couple steps for all this to happen with the WebEx technology right now. So Kemp Burdett is our next speaker. Just checking with Mr. Burdette or Josh Kostrinsky for how we're doing on giving access for Mr. Burdette. If someone cannot access exactly at their point on the list, we would proceed, but that person may return once any difficulty is resolved. We had that occur earlier with Stephen Norris, who's the second registered on the list, and if or whenever he can return, he will have his turn. So I'm just double checking one last time for Kemp Burdette for the moment. We would go on to other speakers if we can't resolve Mr. Burdette coming on the line for his turn at this moment, but he could return at a different time in the meeting. Again, I'm just checking again the list of callers to see if anyone is coming on the line given the list. And unless Josh Kostrinsky tells me differently, I am ready to move to the next speaker on the list. And Mr. Burdette, I'm sorry if you can hear this and there's difficulty unmuting. Again, we will be glad to hear from you whenever that could be resolved. I think we'll go forward at this point. So if Mr. Norris returns, he would come in at whenever is possible. Same for Mr. Burdette. The next speakers are Roy Lee Lindsay, Chad Herring, and Eve Honeycutt. Roy Lee Lindsay, you're next.
My name is Roy Lee Lindsay. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, sir.
I'm the CEO with the North Carolina Pork Council. I want to start this evening and just applaud the General Assembly's decision to require a general permit for farmers who want to capture biogas and generate renewable energy. Having a set of standards that everyone can understand, that everyone knows what's expected of them when they start down the path towards biogas or towards renewable energy will help everyone do a better job in compliance and in the application process. We've heard a lot tonight about cumulative impact. I've heard those terms often, and there are several things I think we should consider when we talk about cumulative impact. It wrongly implies here that renewable natural gas projects are harmful to the community. There's no evidence to support that accusation. To the extent that these projects impact the community, they have positive impacts. These projects reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is a key priority for Governor Cooper. The governor has called for a 40% reduction in statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 2025. The North Carolina Clean Energy Plan says, and I quote, RNG can play an important role in reducing methane emissions, a potent greenhouse gas with global warming potential 25 times greater than carbon dioxide. Reducing methane emissions can have a larger impact on the environment than other carbon reduction initiatives, end quote. These projects offer other positive benefits that should be considered when we talk about cumulative impact. In addition to the environmental benefits associated with reducing greenhouse gases, the use of lagoon covers can minimize odors on farms and reduce the potential for flooding during hurricanes or other severe weather events. So when you consider cumulative impact, consider the cumulative impact of fewer greenhouse gases in our environment, less odor from our covered lagoons, and reducing the potential for flooding. These are all positive impacts that should be weighed. Additionally, recently a poll was conducted in Sampson and Duplin County to measure quality of life and general opinions about living in those counties. 89% of the respondents rate Duplin and Sampson counties as good, very good, or great places to live. 2 of 3 respondents participate in outdoor activities at least once a week. That hardly sounds like a place where odors limit outdoor activity. In addition, by a count of 6-to-1, residents in Duplin and Sampson County favor the creation of renewable natural gas from from hog farms. So again, we would encourage you to think about the positive impacts of reducing odor, of reducing emission, and covering lagoons to help prevent flooding in the event of severe weather.
Time's up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Next three speakers, Chad Herring, Eve Honeycutt, Marlo Ivy. Chad Herring, *3, please, and then we'll go from there.
Hello.
Guy, we can hear you just fine, Mr. Herring. You have the floor.
Well, good evening. My name is Chad Herring, and I'm the Executive Director of North Carolina Farm Families. We are proud to represent thousands of family farmers across the state, including many who are interested in the benefits that RNG projects can offer. As you consider what conditions should be included in the general permit for RNG projects, I would urge you to recognize the positive aspects of these projects and limit the amount of burdensome and unnecessary testing that individual farmers may be required to conduct. It is important to recognize that 24 biogas permits have already been issued by the state of North Carolina over the past decade, and the results have been positive. There have not been any accidents or issues. This is a safe, effective, and proven way to capture methane gas, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and produce renewable energy. It feels like some of the speakers tonight want to impose a bunch of unnecessary testing requirements simply to make it more difficult for farmers to take advantage of this opportunity. I urge you to reject any recommendations that do not provide critical and necessary data to DEQ. We've even heard speakers tonight suggest that you should require air quality testing. I hope you will agree that it is not an appropriate condition to include in a water quality permit. And finally, I'd like to speak to the notion of cumulative impacts. I agree with the previous speaker who said that the impact of RNG projects is positive. So when you look at the cumulative impact, look at the positive benefits that RNG projects bring to the community. Look at the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, look at the opportunity to minimize odors, and look at the ability to reduce potential flooding by using lagoon covers. These are all positive impacts, and the cumulative impact of RNG is a win-win for our farmers, our community, and our environment. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Herring. And our next three speakers, Eve Honeycutt, Marlo Ivy, Kathy Buckley. So first, Eve Honeycutt for *3, and then taking it from there.
This is Eve. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Ms. Honeycutt.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say that I fully support Chad Herring's comments, the speaker before me. My name is Eve Honeycutt, and I have been a technical specialist for 19 years. I have had the opportunity to provide the operator in charge certification training to over 400 people in Eastern North Carolina. I'm an expert in nutrient management plans and all that they entail. I would also like to mention that I live in a community of color in Greene County within a mile of multiple permitted swine facilities, and my family is perfectly healthy and enjoys our outside time anytime we are able to enjoy it. The existing swine general permit conditions that will be carried over into this digester general permit are sufficient for governing all aspects of land application. This framework, as set forth by the current permit, can easily adapt to address any changes in nitrogen concentration, should that even occur. Sampling of the effluent within 60 days of land application will still be required, and the results of that sampling will dictate how much can be applied to growing crops, just like it has always been. Therefore, no additional monitoring or testing requirements prior to land application is necessary. Also, there seems to be some confusion about the nitrogen content of open-air lagoon systems versus digester systems. This is real simple to understand. There is no increase in nitrogen. These farms will not be adding any animals to the barns, therefore no additional nitrogen can be created. In the case of a covered lagoon with no secondary storage, there may be a higher concentration of nitrogen, but this is not the same as more nitrogen. Finally, during the second stakeholder meeting, there were some suggestions that a condition should be added to this new digester permit that would require a farmer to contact every household within a 3-mile radius if some sort of system malfunction occurs. This is nonsensical and overly burdensome. There are already conditions in the existing general permit that lay out requirements for notifying press outlets and or paying to place a public notice in area publications when certain violations occur. Fortunately, these occurrences are rare, and adding digesters to farms will not increase the likelihood of some sort of manure management system failure, as Chad mentioned earlier. Also, there is no such requirement for municipal systems, and the occurrence of system failure and bypasses are quite common, so it would not be appropriate to force such an implication or such condition on farmers. I hope it is clear that all municipalities also use a spray field system. Additionally, these municipalities are permitted to allow discharges when their systems are inundated by excess rainfall. I have no doubt that the digester general permit will effectively and efficiently provide the oversight needed for these types of facilities. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Honeycutt. Next three speakers: Marlo Ivy, Kathy Buckley, Rebecca Drohan, sorry, just want to work on my pronunciations here. First is Marlo Ivy for *3, and then once you get the notice from Mr. Kostrinsky, *6 to unmute. But first, *3 for Marlo Ivy, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Marlo Ivy, you have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Marlo Ivy, and I'm a hog farmer in Eastern North Carolina. I was unable to participate in the technical stakeholders meeting, but appreciate this opportunity to provide my perspective as DEQ contemplates what will be included in this digester general permit. I hear a lot from opponents about cumulative impact, so I wanted to speak to that tonight. I have to admit, I don't understand how opponents can make claims that adding a methane digester on a hog farm could negatively impact the surrounding communities. The benefits of anaerobic digestion are indisputable. It reduces farm odors, curbs greenhouse gas emissions, and replaces the use of fossil fuels to provide heat, fuel, and electricity to North Carolinians. These benefits are well understood across the country and the globe, but folks that self-identify as environmental advocates refuse to acknowledge that on-farm digester systems can play an important role in our fight against climate change. Some opponents will like to say that the term renewable natural gas is somehow not renewable if it comes from swine gas. That is simply nonsense. So long as the world loves bacon, there will be swine biogas. Why in the world would we want to squander the opportunity to utilize that gas to offset fossil fuels? I urge DEQ to put forward a fair permit that includes only these extra conditions required for the construction, operation, and maintenance of the digester, and not unnecessarily overburden some conditions that do nothing to further protect water quality. Thank you for your time.
And thank you, Ms. Ivy. As we are now at about 2/3 through the registered speaker list, let me read the last 10 on the list and note again the two that we did not hear from earlier. So the last 10 on the list, we will hear first from Kathy Buckley, then Rebecca Drohan, Gus Simmons, Ridge Graham, Kevin Weston, Angie Mayer, Edgar Miller, Steve Kavanaugh, Elwood Garner, and Mark Maloney. The two earlier on the list, Stephen Norris and Kemp Burdett. If we can reach them, if they can get a hold of us, they will have their chance as well. But the next three are Kathy Buckley, Rebecca Drohan, Gus Simmons. Kathy Buckley is next.
I am Kathy Buckley.
Yes, we can hear you.
Director,
Please go ahead. Yep, we got you.
Director of Statewide Organizing, NC Apple, the Alliance to Protect Our People and the Places We Live. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. I would ask you to include in your analysis the following. What are the alternatives? Every study asks this. Could we be doing something else? Is aerobic digestion, which has 90% lower methane levels, being considered? What is the effect of capping the lagoon on nitrogen levels, and what risk does that pose to our waterways? What is the cost? Is it 10 times the cost of solar, 20 times? Would the North Carolina Utilities Commission, charged with finding least cost, reliable, clean energy, ever accept this source? As we ratepayers will be required to fund these projects, we must be fully informed as to what we will be charged. Please include the cost to purify the waste and transport costs. Please include measurement of methane leakage at the confined animal feeding operations, the pipeline, the processing facility, and throughout the distribution system. How many renewable credits will our utilities be claiming? Dominion Energy has said that 1%, quote, renewable gas, unquote, in the pipeline should be increased by a factor of 25, since methane is 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas in the short term than carbon dioxide is. So, as Dominion plans on putting 4%, quote, renewable gas, unquote, in their pipelines by 2040, they would multiply that 4% by 25 to come to 100% renewable credit, thereby totally satisfying their commitment to carbon neutrality, and thereby making solar and wind unnecessary. Not in reality, mind you, but by Dominion Energy's greenwashing calculations. And finally, what are the daily and cumulative health effects, physical and mental, on our mostly eastern North Carolina neighbors, who are primarily low-income people of color? I attended a Nancy LaPlaque presentation today, and she quoted E.F. Schumacher. Any intelligent fool can make things bigger, more complex, and more violent. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. This quote is from Schumacher's Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Buckley. Next three speakers, Rebecca Drohan, Gus Simmons, Ridge Graham. Rebecca Drohan or Drohan, sorry if I hope I'm getting it right one of those two ways. You can do *3 and then be notified for being able to unmute with *6 for your turn.
All right. Good evening. This is Rebecca Drohan. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Rebecca Drohan. I am White Oak Waterkeeper with Coastal Carolina River Watch, and we are a water quality advocacy organization serving Carter and Onslow counties. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I do want to express some concern regarding the access to this meeting, and I hope that measures will be taken to ensure that there's maximum participation in this process because it is super important. That said, just to echo a lot of what was already said tonight, biogas does nothing to improve the outdated lagoon and spray field systems and can instead worsen environmental impacts from existing facilities. Biogas projects will perpetuate water contamination, air pollution, and degraded quality of life from the lagoon and spray field system. In communities of color or low income are disproportionately affected by this pollution, with little being done to protect these communities. Any DEQ permitting for biodigesters must be stringent and strictly enforced. Permitting must include provisions for frequent groundwater and surface water monitoring, appropriate management plans, and deterrence for violations. Considerations still worth mentioning include air quality impacts, environmental justice analysis, and the utilization of the most up-to-date technologies. It is imperative that cumulative impacts of biogas be thoroughly evaluated in reference to all surrounding pollution impacts, especially those that are already inflicted by North Carolina's existing CAPO industry. In addition to considering the environmental and health impacts of biogas, measures to improve transparency, public engagement, reporting, and regulatory enforcement need to be taken as well. And given that biogas is dependent on created emissions, it is not a renewable resource as compared to solar and wind. Biogas transport pipelines that span across multiple counties also pose significant environmental risks as well. Throughout this process, please bear in mind that this is a critical time to be investing in a just transition to true clean energy. We need to prioritize the protection of our land, waters, and communities over dependence on destructive and greenwash systems. And as it stands, that responsibility for action currently lies with the DEQ. Please keep that in mind. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Drowan. Next three speakers: Gus Simmons, Ridge Graham, Kevin Weston. Indeed, I see a couple hands up. If you have been a previous speaker, if you could please use *3 to lower your hand if you've already spoken. If you are Gus Simmons, great to have your hand up, and it looks like you're ready to go.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Gus Simmons, and I lead the bioenergy services for Kavanaugh Associates, a North Carolina-based engineering firm. I'm a lifelong North Carolinian, and my family and I reside in Pender County. I've served as a designer and the engineer of record for some of the digester projects that have been previously permitted in North Carolina, and I and our team of engineers and scientists have also provided the design and engineering for similar facilities in other states across the country. And those facilities have received permits similar to what we're talking about this evening. Many farm-based biogas projects have been built and operate across the U.S. due to the noted improvements that digesters provide. Farm-based digesters have been supported by the U.S. EPA due to the significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental benefits that result from the use of anaerobic digestion to process manure and farm waste into recycled, valuable products. I'd like to say that this process for developing a general permit for anaerobic digesters is about all the opportunities for North Carolina farms to add manure management enhancements to facilities that have been existing for quite some time. Digester systems have been proven to provide many benefits, including diversified farm revenues, rural economic growth, conservation of agricultural land, energy independence, and more sustainable food production. It also has been noted by US EPA that digester systems can help improve farm-community relationships, which is something I think all of us on the call this evening would strive for. But that list of benefits are not just my opinions. I actually took that list straight from the US EPA website as it talks about the benefits of anaerobic digestion, particularly as they're implemented in a farm location. Personally, I've observed the data that demonstrates that anaerobic digesters further reduce the presence of disease-causing bacteria in manures from livestock farms across the country and significantly reduce the odors associated with farm manure management systems. In addition to that, capturing the biogas that's generated and repurposing that biogas for an energy resource in our state reduces the methane emissions from those facilities that occur naturally as any organic material decomposes. It seems in the case of most North Carolina farms, adding an anaerobic digester to their manure, to their manure management system will either consist of constructing a new digester or covering an existing lagoon. In both of those cases, either covering an existing lagoon or adding a new digester can reduce the total rainfall inputs to their manure management system, provide additional wet weather storage, and help offset any impacts from extreme weather events that we sometimes see here in Eastern North Carolina.
Time's up, please.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to comment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Simmons. We're now moving to the last 7 speakers of the original list of 28, although we will check on the 2 that we skipped earlier. But the next 3 are Ridge Graham, Kevin Weston, Angie Mayer. Mr. Graham, at least I'm not sure what Ridge Graham is. It could be a female as well. So Ridge Graham, you're next, please.
Hi there. This is Ridge Graham. I'm the North Carolina Field Coordinator for Appalachian Voices. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you for holding this general stakeholder process opportunity to provide comment on this joint permit development for biogas digesters. Thank you as well for the excellent facilitation this evening and technical handling of this impromptu teleconference. It's hard work and everything goes right and expected, so I appreciate everything y'all are doing to keep this going. I want to echo many of the concerns that have been heard this evening about the continuation of the Sprayfield Lagoon system that these digesters would perpetuate. And I would like to see the following requirements be included as part of the general permit application process, not as unnecessary hurdles as other speakers on this evening have derided, but as safeguards for already burdened communities and waterways. The first of which is an implementation of environmental justice analysis and cumulative impact analysis on groundwater and surface water. Along with that, requirements for robust groundwater and surface water monitoring, and a requirement that applicants adopt an alternative technology that would be compatible with these digesters but aren't lagoon and sprayfield systems, which would meet the performance standards of the agreement between Smithfield and the North Carolina Attorney General back in 2000 to eliminate the discharge of animal waste to surface waters and groundwater through direct discharge, seepage, or runoff. That's all I've got to say. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. The next three speakers, Kevin Weston, Angie Mayer, Edgar Miller. Mr. Weston, you are next. *3 to raise your hand. Then thank you. And then *6 at the right time for unmuting for your turn.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening. Please go ahead.
Yes, I'm Kevin Weston. I am currently employed with Smithfield Hog Production. I'm an environmental resource specialist. I've been working in the environmental area of swine production for the last 30 years. I grew up on a hog farm in eastern North Carolina. I still reside in eastern North Carolina on a farm, and I'm surrounded by at least 5 large hog operations that are within a mile of my house. And I have, at no time over the last 30 years that I can recall, not been able to go outside and enjoy my yard or my farm because of the smell or because somebody was doing something at a hog farm. As far as the industry, somebody made a notion about the industry growing. Well, if you recall, back in 1997, the state passed a moratorium on new hog farms, and that moratorium is still in effect as far as I know, and there's not been any new hog farms constructed that I'm aware of. So the industry is not, we're not adding more animals to the state. We're just trying to better and improve the system of handling our management, our waste on these farms. As has been noted from previous speakers like Gus, Eve, and Chad, Keith, they a lot of benefits that come from these digesters being able to capture the methane gas and your covers to keep out rainfall and provide additional storage, that kind of thing. With these type benefits, I have a hard time understanding how this can be a problem for the environmental justice that everybody keeps mentioning. Like I say, I live in these areas just like everybody else does, and I would welcome a system that's going to better capture emissions and make it where we can use those emissions rather than just be wasted. As far as the permit, if you read the actual permit, you'll notice that there are requirements in there that cover everything pretty much. I think the only thing needs to be added to it is that we need to also include a digester component system to the existing collection, treatment, and storage facilities that's already listed in the permit.
Time's up, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weston. Next three speakers, Angie Mayer, Edgar Miller, Steve Kavanaugh. Angie Mayer is next.
Okay, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Hi. This is Angie Meyer with the North Carolina Port Council. I've been with the Port Council for almost 15 years. And it's interesting looking back over the years at how things have changed. It wasn't that long ago that folks in the environmental community, including many on this call tonight, publicly applauded covered lagoons and digesters and chastised the industry for not embracing this technology. And now that it is a reality, it's not good enough. Just like the dog that catches the car, they now have to figure out what to do. Well, what should they do? Well, ask for more, obviously. Let's just move the goalposts again. The groundswell of opposition, curiously, didn't occur until the announcement of the first project of the Smithfield Dominion Partnership, the Align project, the Grady Road project. There was little to no discussion of the more than 24 digester permits issued over the last decade until Smithfield applied for a few permits on company-owned farms. And also curious, there have been permits issued after those in the last couple months, and those were not challenged, but the Smithfield permits were, which again makes the case that it's all about Smithfield and Dominion. Listen, I understand that fundraising for litigation machines requires the dissemination of disinformation and requires fear campaigns. But I hope DEQ will rely on real science to make decisions on what this digester permit should include. Finally, I would like to invite Mr. Moore, who spoke earlier this evening, to visit a farm with a digester. There are several in operation in Duplin County, and although I don't own or operate those farms, I would be delighted to make a connection and make arrangements for you to come visit one of those digester farms and see for yourself what they've got going on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. We are now approaching the last four speakers. The next three are Edgar Miller, Steve Kavanaugh, Elwood Garner. Mr. Miller is next.
John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Good evening. My name is Edgar Miller. I'm the Executive Director and Riverkeeper for Yadkin Riverkeeper based in Winston-Salem. I don't think we're trying to move the goalpost here. I think many of the things that we're asking for tonight, we've been asking for as a community for some time. And although there are currently no farm animal waste digesters proposed in our watershed, at least that we're aware of, I am aware that there is one in our watershed. I am commenting tonight because the general permit framework established for these individual farm digesters will have implications for future animal waste to energy projects in our watershed, and particularly the general permit requirements for dairies that may utilize this technology. We are concerned with the one-size-fits-all general permit approach. I realize that's a legislatively mandated thing. But we're concerned that that will not adequately address the different digester designs, technologies, and site conditions. And we strongly urge the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission to establish detailed permitting requirements to address different digester designs with adequate monitoring requirements and performance standards to protect public health and the environment. We also support the Division of Water Resources evaluating the cumulative environmental impacts where these facilities are proposed. Obviously, some disagreement there about whether this makes things better or worse, but we are particularly concerned about these cumulative impacts in those communities of color already experiencing these disproportionate impacts on their health and quality of life. This is particularly important in our watershed as well as statewide, as we have seen tremendous growth in the poultry industry, largely unregulated growth, and we strongly recommend that the impacts of those facilities be assessed and addressed as part of the digester general permit process for the individual farms. Once again, we have disagreement about whether this improves the climate change situation, concern that capping these lagoons will only exacerbate existing environmental concerns and perpetuate the inadequate spray field and lagoon system. Just imagine how much methane we are producing now in facilities that are not going to be covered. You know, as Larry Baldwin has said in the past, this is really just a Band-Aid on the larger question about how we get these emissions under control.
30 seconds.
There will also be methane leakage and impacts from the pipelines that can impact climate change. And as other speakers have mentioned, we are concerned about potentially concentrating ammonia and nitrate in the liquid waste and hope that the state will consider additional conditions that push operators towards implementing environmentally superior technologies where the money should be spent and discouraging lagoon and spray field technologies. To safeguard water quality and health of nearby residents, permitting should include surface and groundwater monitoring for nutrients and bacteria. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're moving to the last three of the original 28 speakers, Steve Kavanaugh, Elwood Garner, Mark Maloney. I will want to check if Steve Norris or Kemp Burdett, who had signed up earlier, would speak. As we finish with Mr. Maloney, I'll address the opportunity for other attendees who did not sign up in advance for their ability to speak at the public input session right now. Steve Kavanaugh, you're next as our speaker.
Good evening. I'm Steve Kavanaugh, a licensed professional engineer and president of Kavanaugh, a 26-year North Carolina consulting firm. We live our mission of cultivating stewardship of our earthly resources through innovation. Since 1995, we've been working with a diverse group of stakeholders who have expressed a keen interest in improving the air and water quality of our state. In 1998, our firm worked closely with NC State to place a demonstration manure treatment system on a farm in Onslow County to study the environmental benefits of screening, as well as nitrogen and phosphorus uptake of swine effluent. This experience led to our selection as the project technical manager for the Environmentally Superior Demonstration Initiative. In this role, we assisted NC State, technology providers, the public, and the swine industry in evaluating enhancements to the permitted swine waste handling systems. Of note, the anaerobic digester was determined to be the most cost-effective at achieving the majority of the environmentally superior criteria at the time, and none of the technologies were found to meet all of the criteria, including economic feasibility. We then worked with Duke University on Lloyd Ray Farms to implement an on-farm digester with renewable energy recovery, and then partnered with Optima Bio to implement the first clustered swine-derived biogas collection and injection project in our state, using anaerobic digesters to convert manure into biogas. This project, the Optima Bio project, created the first natural gas to be placed into the pipeline grid ever from within North Carolina. This history is important because it's been informative. I mean, the steps that we're talking about tonight and the next steps moving forward are so better informed by those projects that have advanced each step of the way. The swine industry has made so much headway with each of these steps. The installation of the digesters is a major leap forward for farming communities, its neighbors who count on agriculture to support them, and to our environment. Bottom line, I've been in this a long time, and I support a consistent and streamlined digester permitting process that allows these projects to proceed and remove greenhouse gas from the farms and our environment. Let's not lose sight of the big picture, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kavanaugh. Two speakers on the list, Elwood Garner, then Mark Maloney. Elwood Garner, you're next. *3. And then after Mr. Kostrinsky responds, *6 for your turn, Mr. Garner. Just double checking, don't want to rush. I know the technology has been a bit of a challenge today. *3 for Elwood Garner. And then Mr. Kostrinsky responds, and *6 to unmute and begin. I'm just checking the list as carefully as possible and do not want to rush this. I know this is a bit challenging, but I recall from earlier on, Mr. Garner was able to get in and check in with us, and he knows he was at this slot in terms of the 28 speakers who had signed up in advance. We've had two that we did not hear from, Stephen Norris and Kemp Burdett. We will double check if we need to go back to see if they are now ready. But first, it's Elwood Garner and then Mark Maloney. And then I'll speak to any other attendees' opportunities to speak at this public input session. So Mr. Garner, I'm sorry if we have lost you or if the technology has become a bit more challenging since I heard from you at the very beginning of our meeting tonight. Again, I'm trying to be as careful as possible to not rush things related to people operating on their phones rather than being able to see one another online. Apologies again for that very significant technical difficulty for what we had planned. Without seeing any specific action from what I can see on the screen, again, Mr. Garner, I'll check back, and we will not end the meeting without plenty of opportunity for you to come back and speak. But I'll go forward with Mark Maloney. Mark Maloney, the last of the 28 original registered speakers, but I will check with the 3 that we have not heard from at this point. Looks like Mr. Maloney is getting ready.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Maloney, you have the floor.
Terrific. My name is Mark Maloney. I am with Optima. We are a swine waste to renewable gas developer here in North Carolina. And I personally have been developing RNG projects in the U.S. since 2010. I've worked on multiple RNG projects from multiple waste streams in multiple states. So as an actual owner of digesters in North Carolina, I think it is important to emphasize and remind everyone of a single outcome from these types of projects. These projects reduce the on-farm waste associated with animal operations. This is science fact. This is not science fiction, as some of these folks who've called in would want you to believe. So anaerobic digestion is Mother Nature's way of taking care of organic waste. This is simply biology. This is not anything else except for Mother Nature. There are no new waste streams that are created from these types of projects. And in fact, digesters are a solution that is good enough to treat human waste here in Raleigh, where I live, but somehow when used or proposed on swine farms, and it sounds like from this call that in particularly people are poking the finger at swine farms for some reason, digesters somehow on swine farms become a, quote, danger to the communities. This is simply not the facts. These are not the facts. As much as folks would like to call in and scare folks on this call and communities with regards to what these projects do, I think is important that the truth at the end of the day win out. Again, this is science fact. Cleaner technologies is a soundbite I've heard multiple times tonight, but at no point did any single commenter propose what a cleaner, quote, technology might actually look like. What might it be? As somebody who's putting solutions in the ground and not putting sound bites into the air, I would love to know what these solutions are, but I suspect they don't exist. And then with regards to the water permit, I want to stress that these projects are voluntary. If these permits come with strings and testing and oversight and regulation, then these projects simply become harder and less viable, and they will ultimately, people will choose not to build these projects and the status quo continue. So cumulative effects of these projects on the communities are tremendous, and I think the science supports it, and the science needs to win. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Returning to the speakers who had signed up that we have not heard from, my understanding is Mr. Burdett is not on the line or is not ready. I see two hands at this point. Now one hand from area code 910. Is that either Mr. Garner or Mr. Norris? If Josh can unmute, if it's either of those two originally signed up, it looks like we're ready to go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, I had a problem getting in a while ago. My name is Elwood Garner. I live in Duplin County. It's been referred to as Duplin County. It's been referred to as Dooplin County. Neither one is correct. It's Duplin County. As I sit here tonight cooking great Duplin County pork, I want to raise some issues for DWQ to realize when they're issuing these permits. I'm a hog farmer, and while I do not currently have a digester on my farm, it is my hope that I will have the opportunity to invest in one in the near future. And because of that, I am very interested in the outcome and hearing of what the final digester general permit will contain. I was a participant in the last stakeholder meeting. I had several things that caused concern to my overall takeaway from the meeting, that was that opponents do not have an understanding of what already exists in our permits. A great number of the suggestions made by the other side involve conditions that already are included in our permit. It is coming over to our new permits if we put in a digester. At the stakeholder meeting and tonight, there has been a lot of discussion around the health, the circumstances, offenses that these claims, and I am in barns about the animals I'm in my barns every day, probably longer than most people are outside. I do not have any health consequences. My employees do not have any health consequences. So we cannot talk about health consequences when we're leading these studies that allow people to understand the way we want them to answer. A great example of this is the asthma study of the middle school students by Dr. Steve Wang, where he conventionally failed to report the study that his data 2 miles from hog farms reported less wheezing than students further away from farms. The data tells the real story. I encourage DEQ to take a closer look at that, or any study that has cited hog farms cause
30 seconds
adverse consequences. This is not about a lagoon and spray field permit. I appreciate WebEx, DEQ for their efforts in getting through the WebEx problems that we had with at the start of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garner. So my understanding is we have worked through our list other than for Stephen Norris. I want to give any chance if Mr. Norris is on the call, since he was number 2 on the list. While we wait to see if he wishes to step up, here's my understanding of moving forward. It is 8:13 p.m. and this public input session was reserved until 9 p.m. We wanted to make sure that the registered speakers had their chance to speak, and with the exception of Mr. Norris and Mr. Burdett, all of them have spoken. So I am then in a moment, once I'm finally assured that Mr. Norris is, and again, I'm just trying to double check. Mr. Garner, if you are the 910290 number, if you could please use *3 to lower your hand. If, on the other hand, thank you very much. And again, Stephen Norris, if you are with us and you wish to speak, please use *3 to recognize, to be recognized and move forward from there. While we wait for that, and again, please hold off until I give you the thumbs up. We have 39 attendees. I think some of the 28 speakers have departed. So we may have anywhere between 10 to 15 approximately people who are still with us and may wish to speak. When I give you the sign, I will ask for anyone to use *3 to raise their hand, and then I will call on people as I see those hands. Give it just a moment, but I want to give Stephen Norris last call. This is sort of like the air terminal. This is your last call for speaking per your registration for this public input session. And as I refresh my screen and double check one last time, I do not see a hand that could be Mr. Norris's. Now, for anybody else who has not already spoken, you may use *3 to raise your hand and leave it there, and then I will simply call on the hands that I see up in whatever order I can recognize them, and we'll move forward. The first hand I see at the moment is phone number that begins 252636. Mr. Kostrinsky will give you the okay, and then you can use *6, and you will have your 3 minutes. Please state your name as you begin your 3 minutes. Please go ahead, 252.
My name is Rick Dove. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Dove.
My name is Rick Dove. I'm the senior advisor with Waterkeeper Alliance, and I was a Neuse River Keeper from 1993 to 2000. I've been involved with following the practices of the hog industry in North Carolina for 30 years. I've got about 3,000 hours in the air flying over hog farms, taking pictures by the thousands and video and so on. I got to say, it's deja vu, deja vu, deja vu. We have these meetings, we have these new permits, and we tweak a system and we come up with a new idea, and the time goes on and all these lagoons just kind of hang out there, and the discharges to surface waters continues just forever. I mean, it's incredible. I've seen it all. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent sampling sites for discharges and finding discharges. It's a very common practice. I've flown after the hurricanes, and I've seen the devastation after the hurricanes. Let me make this point. And I've also visited multiple times a methane producing facility. And everything on that facility is a hog farm in typical shape with discharges of ammonia and all the problems that go along with that. The capture of methane is a good thing. That is a good thing. The piping of it, not so good. But the capture of methane is good. The real problem we have in North Carolina is most all the lagoons are full of sludge. And the contract growers, they don't have the money to take care of the hundreds of thousands of dollars to get rid of that sludge. So what are we going to do? We're going to start covering these lagoons, and we're going to capture methane. But to do that, we got to dig another hole in the ground. Is that right? We dig another hole in the ground so that there's more capacity. Maybe that makes up for the sludge that's in the other lagoons that shouldn't have been there. Most of these lagoons are 30 years old, and they're well past their real useful life. The problem we have in North Carolina is we need to get rid of lagoons and spray fields. The ammonia, the hydrogen sulfide, those are the problems that hurt the neighbors in the neighborhoods. Now, the question was asked earlier, what is the technology to get rid of lagoons and spray fields? It's called a wastewater discharge system. Whenever you whenever you bring people in from the countryside across America, you put them in a city like New Bern, you got to put in a very costly wastewater treatment system. If you're going to concentrate hogs the same way you concentrate people in cities, you got to put in a wastewater treatment plant. The problem is they're very, very expensive. So what is the solution for the hog industry in North Carolina? Right now, it's to externalize. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Dove. And if you can use *3 to lower your hand, and then I see another two, well, I'm sorry, I think it's one hand. I think we just heard from, yes. Okay, the next hand I see is phone number that begins 910-293. Again, we'll keep the 3-minute time limit with the 30-second notice. So the next hand I see, and again, I'll keep looking for hands as they come, 910-293. Please tell us your name as you start.
This is Craig Westerbeek. I've been a technical specialist and worked in the environmental area of hog production for 28 years. And while I haven't flown over hog farms for 3,000 hours, I've spent well over 500,000 hours of my career trying to make hog farms more sustainable, improving on the systems we have. And I think that's something that's absolutely occurred. Getting back to the issue at hand tonight, which is the anaerobic digester permits, I wanted to make a few points. The forthcoming digester general permit will include all the provisions included in the current swine general permit, and that includes all the conditions necessary to govern land application of swine effluent. They're very protective, and they do a good job. Any additional permit condition that requires influent testing is unnecessary. While collecting this information could be useful to gain greater knowledge about the system performance for an operator and increase gas production, there's no reason that such testing should be mandated by the state. Similarly, it would be unnecessary to require any sampling of the digestate at the point of entry into a secondary treatment lagoon. Just as the case of influent testing, this information may be valuable for an operation standpoint, but there's no reason to require such sampling as a permit condition. There's been some mention of scraper systems over the last several months being added to digester facilities in other states. Very familiar with that. It's important to remember that these other states have very different climates. Scraper systems can enhance digester systems in some cases, and that's typically in colder climates. Scrapers here would not necessarily be beneficial for neither gas production nor for increased environmental protection for a multitude of reasons that anyone that understood the system would understand very well. It would be improper for this permit to create any new conditions that required air emissions testing. This is a Division of Water Resources permit, not an air quality permit. And more specifically, with regards to ammonia, North Carolina law is clear that farms are exempt from ammonia emissions requirements. And beyond that, it's impossible for these systems to create more ammonia. It's the same farms, they're existing farms, they're not expanding, and there's no nitrogen machine making additional nitrogen in these systems. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Westerbeek. So we've heard from 28 speakers, and then Rick Dove and Craig Westerbeek. I am again double checking to see about hands. While I'm looking for additional hands, let me state again that comments can continue to be submitted through this Friday, December 17th, through the email address publiccommentsdwr@ ncdenr.gov. So that's public comments, and then the DWR is in capital letters. The others are lower at ncdenr.gov. I see 37 attendees. I'm not sure how many of the 28 may have departed. We are at 8:23, so there is still time for additional speakers at the 3-minute time limit if people are interested. I see a new speaker at area code 704 and then another one at 919. Let's go to the 704-431 as our next speaker, and then please also leave your hand up at 919-622. So 704-431 will be our next speaker. Please offer your name as you begin your comments. And then the speaker after that will be at phone number 919-622, etc. So let me say, get ready to go. And yes, please, at area code 704, what's your name, please?
Yes, this is Michael Shepard with the Division of Soil and Water Conservation. Yes, I just wanted to make a couple comments. I think this digester permit would be a great opportunity, not only for our swine producers, but also our dairy producers in the state. I think the general permit that are out there for all three, the swine, dairy, and wet poultry now, are very extensive as far as regulatory, monitoring requirements, oversight of what's going out and being actually land applied on the fields. And so I don't see the necessary need for any additional regulatory requirements for these digester permits. I think our 3 general permits now would be suffice for any digester permits. So with that, I think that'll be all my comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shepard. The next hand I see is for 919-622. And so we'll get that set up for our next additional speaker after Mr. Shepard. 919-622 can go forward when you're ready with the 3-minute limit. (919-622), we're ready for you. Please tell us who you are. Okay, may have a little challenge there. Let's see what we got going on here. Let me refresh, see if I'm missing anything here from that previous speaker. There we go again. Please go ahead, 919-622. Who are you, please? Whenever you're ready, *6. I think you've already hit it. At least it looks like you're ready to go. 919-622. Doesn't seem like we're connecting at that point. Again, let me just give it a moment. I'm working on everybody's patience. Thank you, everybody, for rolling with the difficulties with our WebEx technology platform this evening. So I don't want to rush for 919-622 if we can come through to that person for the next speaker. Okay, I'll ask for other hands at this point. And again, 919-622, we're happy to hear from you if we can make it work. Are there other people who would like to speak who were not part of the original list of 28? We'd like to give everyone that opportunity. to speak who has been in attendance tonight at the public input session on digester permit development. Again, I see a total right now of 32 attendees. I don't know how many have already spoken, but want to give new people to speak every opportunity at this point. While I pause to see, yep, here we go. Let's see if we got 919-622. If we can get to the full side of the microphone on and this person being able to speak. Please go ahead if you're ready.
Yes, this is Reich Longest. I wanted to set the record straight on a few matters from my perspective that I've earlier heard. First of all, I would just say to Mr. Westerbeek, I know that you have been spending your career aiming to make hog farms more sustainable, and that is an admirable goal. What we're here to talk about tonight specifically is what should be required on biogas permits for digesters, a new technology being installed in widespread use all across North Carolina. And given that it's a general permit, the real concern is, do we have enough information to turn a technology which has been subject to a couple of dozen experimental projects into something that we put widespread all across North Carolina? Once a general permit gets put in place, the ability to have scrutiny on individual farms by the department and by the public will be decreased. And certainly what the General Assembly did this summer was intended to streamline that process. What we're hoping to do today is think about what are some of the monitoring requirements that need to be included. And I believe surface water monitoring and groundwater monitoring requirements are things that need to be included because of the age of the existing systems, their design life, which was not intended to be a permanent design, and the real impacts that these have on surface and groundwaters as well as on air quality. I recognize this is not an air quality permit, but we are talking here about the water quality impacts. That's what we're talking about. With respect to Mr. Kavanaugh's statement about the environmentally superior technologies, I worked on that project. None of the anaerobic digester projects met all of the standards. Those that came close did so by adding on additional technologies. Those additional technologies include things like nitrification and denitrification systems, solid separation technologies, the ability to precipitate out some of the nutrients from the effluent from digesters. All of these combinations of technologies were studied. The Lloyd Ray Farm project was one in which I worked directly with Kavanaugh and with other folks at Duke with the intention of a project being available that could meet all of the environmental superior technology standards, which are the environmental performance standards now codified in the North Carolina General Statutes for new and expanding farms. And I also want to correct one other thing. There was an economically feasible technology combination that was determined by Dr. Williams. The problem was it was for the category of new farms, and there has not been a new or expanding hog farm in North Carolina since that time. As it regards to moving the goalpost, the moving of the goalpost has happened by the General Assembly. Each and every session, the General Assembly has made it harder for neighbors and those who are concerned about the environmental impacts of hog farms to get their voices heard. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Longest, as the fourth of the additional speakers beyond the original list. We are at 8:30, so there is still room for additional people who are attending who have not already spoken to raise their hand and be recognized for 3 minutes for helping the Division of Water Resources do their task of developing general permits in 3 categories of AFOs: cattle, wet poultry, and swine. So I continue to simply monitor the list of phone numbers that is on my screen to be able to see when someone raises their hand so I can recognize them. So Mr. Kostrinsky can give the correct invitation for unmuting and going from there. While we wait for that, as a reminder that this and the additional emailed public comments through this Friday, December 17th, will complete the outreach effort prior to the Division of Water Resources creating a draft permit. And then in 2022, once that draft is ready for public review, there will be the standard public hearing process for input responding to the draft permit. I am just double checking again, and I'm beginning to get the sense that we may be moving towards the conclusion of this public input session. Apologies again for the challenges related to the technology. Thank everyone for their input, for calling in, and again, for me trying to be as even-handed as possible, for taking first the people that registered in advance in the order of registration for the 28 folks, and now 4 additional speakers that we've had since then, all trying to stay, again, almost everyone stayed exactly well within the 3-minute limit. I'm looking to see if anyone else is raising their hand for wishing to speak. And I'm about to double check with the DEQ experts about if there's anything else to cover at this public input session. I'm seeing a shake of no that we are getting near the end at this point. And so I'm just doing one last check. As this is a very different kind of last call. I'm afraid there's nothing related to alcoholic libations, but instead we are about to close the public input session. Thank you for all attendees. Thank you for the 28 people who originally registered. One last call for Stephen Norris. Maybe he took a different flight today. And thank you, Mr. Garner, for making sure that we heard from you. Thank you for our last 4 speakers, Rick Dove, Craig Westerbeek, Michael Shepard, right longest. And without hearing anything further, I'm going to say thank you and good night. And there is until this Friday the 17th for your email final input before the draft permit is prepared early next year. Thank you. Have a good holiday season. And I'm sure you will continue to be involved in this process of permit development. Thank you and good night.